Welcome to the Advanced Watkins Glen event coming up in a week or so on September 20th and 21st. This Zoom/YouTube classroom is being recorded, and then there will be a Q&A session that will be live on Thursday. Before we get started, let me just highlight a couple of things. The topic today is how to avoid big mistakes and improve learning. And that may seem an odd combo at first, but let me see if I can connect some dots. We all know that when we drive, we make many mistakes, and none of us drive perfect laps. The key thing, of course, is to recognize and respond to those. No big surprise there. But the thing that surprised me as I started thinking about this topic was that if you think about ways to reduce risk, it turns out to be more or less the same things you would do to improve your driving. Or if we say it another way, if we focus on improving our driving the right way, we minimize the risks that we take on track. So with that in mind, let's dive in and see if we can understand why that actually works. Let me get the computer going here. So okay, here we go. So there's our topic for today. We call this the Trackside Classroom Series. We're doing it in advance so that you can watch this at your leisure and watch it more than once if you like. I'll also talk about Watkins Glen turn by turn after we go through the classroom portion here. So my normal disclaimer, if you try stuff that we talk about here and it doesn't work, it's your fault. Said another way, we all know we take risks when we go on track, and we accept those risks when we sign the waiver and show up at the track. So if Sterling Moss never drove a perfect lap, you probably didn't. I know I haven't. So what does that mean? Well, mistakes are a natural part of what we do every day. They're a natural part of learning. And so we have to accept that we're going to make mistakes and treat them as a learning opportunity. But we want to keep them small, and we want to keep them single for reasons we'll talk about later. We just want to catch the mistake, collect the car, move on. And we actually want to convert any self-judgments like I'm not very good at braking or turn one or whatever it is to I'm working on turn one, and then work on improving that skill. And we obviously want to stay mentally focused in the moment. If we're losing focus, then have a trigger word like Ross Bentley talks about, eyes up or something to that effect. So some interesting thoughts and quotes about how to avoid big mistakes. I'll let you read these. They're kind of fun. I like the last one a lot. Never run out of real estate traction ideas at the same time. Hopefully that doesn't happen to anyone listening here, but it has been known to happen. And that's why we're talking about this right up front for just a minute. You've all heard me say what's on the next couple of slides before. I'm going to go through them very quickly, but they're important and I really want to emphasize them. When do we want to recognize a mistake? As early as possible, really early, whether that's in a turn, a braking zone, a skid, or a mechanical failure. In terms of turning, where the majority of mistakes happen, Skip Barber puts it very bluntly. If you're any good, and everybody listening to this for Watkins Glen is an advanced driver, if you're any good, the instant you turn your hands into the corner, you know if you've made a mistake. And what does that mean? Well, we all know that if you're early, in a best situation, you can drive off the track and collect the car and yourself and then drive back on the track. On the other hand, most early mistakes end up, hitting something hard on the inside of a corner. Why does that happen? Because if we recognize a mistake early, right after we turn in, we can adjust. We can slow down, we can straighten the wheels, we can drive off under control, and everything's fine. However, the rookie mistake, which happens way too often, even in white, black, and sometimes red run groups, is to not recognize that mistake, whether it's too early or too fast, or just on the wrong line, until the middle of the corner. In which case, if we now back out of it, as opposed to just straightening the car and driving off, we're going to hit something hard on the inside. So this is the worst typical incident that happens. Not the only one, but the most common one. And you've heard me talk about it before, but people keep making this mistake. Now, knowing what the car feels like helps. And you're going to see a number of slides using material from Peter Krause that he presented in our instructor seminar and our driving seminar earlier this year. And he emphasized, car control helping in minimizing mistakes, whether you get that at a skid pad, an autocross, or similar kinds of activities. I love his, reference to a 3,000-pound dance partner. We can't tell the car what to do. We can suggest what the car should do, but it's a lot bigger than we are. You've all heard about, when you spin, both feet in. Peter adds to that, when in doubt, both feet out. So if you're not sure, then, come off the gas and certainly come off any brakes. And I would add to that, relax the steering wheel. In other words, let the car go where it wants to go rather than where you're trying to force it to go when it really doesn't want to. And of course, there's a correct pause and recovery and recover mechanism to, catch the car before it spins. But that has to happen early as well. If the car has started to spin, it's too late. The correct part has to happen instantly. This is one of the few times on track, it's an emergency. If the car is starting to step out, if we don't correct now, it's gone, right? That's why car control exercises on a skid pad and places like that, where you can feel how fast that happens, is really essential. So you knew all of that. That's stuff you've heard from me before and from others. But how do we connect the dots between avoiding mistakes and learning faster? And here I'm going to rely a lot on what Peter talked to us about and emphasize some of the ways he helps drivers improve in baby steps. His language, best execution of fundamental skills. He hammers on not going faster, but on minute ways that we can dissect our driving and get better. So he talks about consistency in terms of speed, car placement, control input speed and amplitudes. He emphasizes practicing deliberately and adding speed very incrementally. Balancing risk versus reward, we'll talk more about that. And in the case of passing, the overtaking car always has the responsibility to make sure it's safe. Now, he emphasizes, much as you've heard me in the past as well, the importance of consistency. In fact, he says that's the #1 best execution of fundamental skills, the #1. And by that, he includes a whole list of items, and I'll talk more about those in a minute. But things like lateral car position, braking force, entry speed. Stating the obvious, you've heard this before, work on corner exit before corner entry. Corner exit has to be consistently close to perfect before we want to do anything with corner entry. Develop a go, no-go system so that if the car isn't doing what it wants to do, we do a no-go. And I'm going to say more about that, but this goes back to identifying mistakes early and doing something about them. The other important thing about consistency that I like to emphasize is the baseline effect. All drivers, whether you're a brand new student driver on track or a very experienced driver, you learn in increments and steps. Sometimes those are, as you're learning new to track, those are big steps. But those of us who've driven a lot, those steps tend to be small ones. We often end up on a plateau, and then we can take a small step up and so on. But how do we measure progress, especially as an experienced driver? Well, we have to have a baseline. And I don't mean lap time, I mean technique baseline. And I mean technique at the level Peter likes to talk about it, where that baseline includes your braking points. How hard are you on the brake pedal? What's the brake pressure? What's your corner entry speed? You know, what's your end of braking? What's your throttle application point? What's your wide open throttle? On down the list. Peter could add 100 items to that list, and you should think about it in those terms as well. If you don't have that baseline of consistency in reference points, in speeds, and brake pressure, and so on, then we don't have a baseline to measure against or a baseline to improve against. So we can modify something and see if it helps us be safer and faster. And of course, the big idea here is there is no single big idea. At the advanced level, progress is the sum of many small improvements. The gain of a few tenths or even a few hundredths, if you're a really good driver, is progress. And as you get better, you go after smaller gains. Ross Bentley talks about the same idea, saying that the advanced drivers, the pros, just do the basics better. And it's simple as that. No silver bullets. It's just doing the basics better. So with that in mind, here from Peter are some of the skills to think about when you're on track and to work on. Utilize the full width of the track. It seems obvious, right? But I've seen drivers many times crab in from the edge of the road before they turn in, or not. I see drivers all the time missing apexes by a foot or 2 feet. Shift at the same RPM, brake at the same point, brake with the consistent brake pressure and decelerative force, to use Peter's words. Look at apexes as areas, not a singular point, and touch every inside curve. It's especially important at Watkins Glen in some of the corners, which I'll highlight when we do the turn by turn. Keep your eyes moving, look at the landmarks, keep your eyes out and above. Peter suggested, especially for students, but if you need help reminding where to look and to keep the eyes up, put a piece of clear plastic tape on the windshield, below which you really don't need to look unless you're glancing at the dashboard. And also, different speed corners require different speed inputs. Slow corner, fast hands, fast corner, slow hands, that sort of thought. So this is not a complete list, but it's an example of skills that if we work on them, we get better and we get safer. Now, of course, every car can be driven faster by someone else, but we may not have their skills. And the reminder here about smooth doesn't have to mean slow, just to my point a minute ago. But Peter says number one is to optimize four-axis control input execution. Fancy way to say, are we controlling moving the weight forward and backwards? The photo shows, a driver, in this case, I think it's Nico Rosberg, making a mistake with too much forward brake, right? On the brakes too hard, too late. But, just an example of, getting the skills executed properly. So what are common opportunities for improvement, in Peter's words. Yeah, trying to go too fast in slow parts of the track. Not too big of an issue at Watkins Glen, since all the corners are really pretty fast. But a common mistake at Watkins Glen is being impatient with the longer corners, with the laces, especially with the heel and the off camber. Inconsistent braking, whether that's inconsistent braking points or more likely inconsistent brake pressure. Very common, getting on the gas too early, but then not being able to commit and squeeze the gas on. Sloppy car placement. If you try to go faster, you may start to creep in from the edge of the track or miss an apex or so on. And too much trail braking or trail braking in the wrong places. Common mistake that I see that I've added to Peter's list here. So how do we fix mistakes? How do we improve? It's the same question, two sides of the same coin. Deliberate practice, 1 or 2 priorities per session that we focus on. We add speed in small bites, and we balance risk versus reward with our go, no-go system. So this is something every driver should, in fact, must have if you're going to prevent getting into a serious incident. Big mistakes, according to Peter, are the result usually of lots of little ones accumulating without the driver recognizing and doing something about them. So we can apply go, no go to, the line, to our speed, to traffic, or to recovering from an error. So the way this works is very simple. At every time we're ready to turn the wheel, squeeze the gas pedal, or make some other adjustment, there should be a switch in our head that says everything's good, I can continue to do what I was planning to do, or something isn't quite right. So now I have to make an adjustment. It may be a severe adjustment to bail out, or it may be a minor adjustment. But whatever it is, that switch is there to tell us something's wrong, and therefore we can't do things the way we plan to do them. So I think this is a great way to think about what we do on track, and a great way to prevent incidents, because if we find ourselves in a piece of the track that's not where we normally are, that ought to be a big red flag. It's a no-go. How do I, safely bail out at this point? Whether that means I just have to straighten the wheel a little bit, or feed on a little less gas, or maybe it means I have to straighten the wheel a lot, stand on the brakes and drive off into the grass. Whatever it is, all of those things are much better than trying to keep the car on the track when it doesn't want to stay on the track. So incident avoidance obviously includes situational awareness, which means you should never be surprised on the track. No surprises. This is Peter's way to come at it. That means very good vision and other techniques on track, as we've talked on other classes. Obviously requires good judgment and good decisions. That's where the go, no-go comes in. Emotions really can get in the way. If you're excited, too excited, that too much adrenaline could be could get in the way. More likely though, if you've been upset by an incident, or you felt you were chopped off, or whatever it happened to be, if you let any red mist get in the way, that can really cause and lead to an incident. If you do make a mistake, a small one, a medium one, even a big one, make it a learning opportunity. And by all means, beware a big jump or a big lunge. Don't try to take a corner 5 miles an hour faster because you think you can go a little bit faster. Take it half a mile an hour faster, or 1 mile an hour faster, that kind of thing. At the level of advanced driving, big changes are going to lead to big accidents, simply put. So to summarize, everyone makes mistakes. Treat them like a learning opportunity. Be aware of early and fast, and learn to identify and correct. I'm emphasizing the go, no go, because that's how you can both improve your driving, because if you say, oh, I made a small mistake, can I still go ahead? Well, maybe I turned in 2 feet too early, and I have to make a small adjustment, and I have to pause a bit on when I can commit to the gas. Small mistake, small correction, learning opportunity. That's what we want to do. Go, no go helps us there just as much as it does with big incidents. And work on the skill development with deliberate practice. Pick whatever skills you think you're either the best at and improve that, or pick a weak point and work on that. I've given you a list earlier here of some to think about. And most important, from Peter's experience and from mine, number one, driving consistency. If you're not driving consistently, if you're not executing these skills consistently, then work on that. Work on those techniques. Forget your lap times, work on the technique. Your lap times will automatically get better. So with that, we're going to shift gears, at least mentally here, and talk about Watkins Glen. So there's track maps you can print on the website. I highly encourage you to print out several and make notes on those. I have a notebook full of notes on track maps. I hope you do too. A reminder about passing zones. These will be in the track pack. Most Watkins Glen passing zones are mandatory sides. That includes expanded passing. Back straight's only right side, the sole is only right side, and so on. No passing in the S's in any group, including expanded passing. So I'm going to do a video here. Some of you have seen this before, but it gives us a chance to take a look at the track and talk about some of the reference points. And then I'll do kind of a turn by turn around the track. Obviously, my reference points, this is me driving, are going to be different than yours. So there's no, what I do want you to do is I've thought about where some of those reference points are, like some of the other. So coming into turn one, my experience says you really need a consistent turn-in point. So I've found black tire marks on the outside there that I can use. Then I have references as I go through the turn in for turn two. The cone is normally much later. Earlier, end up with a single device, actually a touch faster, a little harder. Back straight, passes where they can work on the back straight. Section not anticipated. Okay, turn in here. I turn in at the beginning of the white line, and then try to be off the brakes by the time I'm at the first apex and on the gas before I get to the second apex. Heavy gas once I'm into here. We have to be looking to the right to know where to turn in, but we'll stay to the inside, as I think everyone knows. It's a long apex, not just a point. It's opposite the flag station. Notice on the right here, there's a sign. That's a reference point. There's also that grate on the right. Let me see. The turn in, to make sure you're turning in is right opposite the first flag station. So this point toe, should be aware that there are sealer patches and seams that we can use. They are hard to see in the video here. And a lot of drivers don't see them at all, but they're easy to see. Reference points at the beginning of the next two corners are long corners. This is where many drivers will turn in too early or get to the apex too early because they get a bit impatient. And that applies even to drivers with experience. So, these are long corners, require patience. We have to be, we want to run along both apexes, especially on off for some distance. Off-campers the long apex. We can turn in a lot earlier than normal here. We do it very gradually and trail the brakes in that long apex. Don't try that. Try that at a reduced speed if you're going to try something like that. We want to pick up some gas, but not necessarily a lot, until we are way good. Unlike the previous corners, the next two corners don't reward trail braking. We're going to brush the brakes at 150. We're going to turn at 100 and come off the brakes and immediately get on some gas. Turn in left to set up here again for brushing the brakes and turning in. It seems like earlier than we would want, and even apexing a bit earlier. And not much trail brake. We want to get on the gas early, settle the car, be able to commit to the throttle. So there's an overhead of the track. Everybody, I think, knows the turn numbers. So turn one of the most important corners on the track, since speed we carry out of here carries us all the way to the bus stop. And an interesting corner, because while it's 90 degrees, it's got so much banking that it doesn't drive like anywhere near a flat 90-degree corner would. As I said before, I find that the turn-in point is really critical here, that you need to be plus or minus a few inches, and if you're not, it really can mess up the line. I also find that too many drivers turn in early here, earlier than they should, and or kind of crab in from the edge and don't wait to track left until they get to the turn-in point. Braking, this is a corner not to brake late for. We want to come out of this corner fast, and yes, we can carry speed into it, but not if it impacts our ability to commit to the gas and get our foot on the floor. So brake a little bit early. The braking zone is downhill, so it's not that helpful to us. The grip is good, but it is still downhill. So wherever you're braking, whether it's 400 or 300, we want to get the braking done. We want to have a very smooth trail off. We don't want to be on a lot of trail brakes. Some is fine, but at turn-in, I've often said, roughly a 2 on brake force. So, and trailing off fairly quickly after that. Here's the turn-in cone. There are tire marks and other references one can use to find a good solid turn-in point here. Use the low rumbles at the apex and run along them for 10 or 15 feet. Don't use the high curb here. That'll really upset the car. But the low rumbles, make the corner a lot easier than if you stay off of them. Here's the exit. Lots of room at the exit here. The S's. So I think everyone knows that the line through the first part, through turn 2, is really along the paint on the right. We'll see that in the next one here, I think. So everyone also knows how steep these corners are. The exit for turn 2, the turn in for turn 3 is the end of the blue Armco on the right, or the end of the paint here. They're almost the same. You know, pick one that works for you, and it gives you a nice consistent turn in. And this is a case, remember I said earlier, you know, fast corner, slow hands. Well, this is a fast corner. So it needs to be deliberate, but it needs to be patient too. And we all know we're going across the crown of the road here, so the car feels nervous. If you do need to make a speed adjustment in the S's, you know, make that speed adjustment coming up the hill. Don't be lifting at this point. If you need to lift or breathe, you know, do that coming up the hill, and then be back on, whether you're on the floor or not, doesn't matter, but have the accelerator going down at least at a slight rate or more as you turn and go across the crown here. If you're not committed to the gas at this point, the car is really going to feel nervous. And if you were to lift here, I don't want to think about it. Turn 3, another long apex, kind of over the hill from, we can't see it even as we turn in, you know, because it's still blind, but we all know it's there. Run along here. We can't see the upcoming right-hander either as we start to bend the car in. This section is easier for most drivers. It's faster. It's open. The track's opening up. Lots of fun. Turn 4, even faster, right? And feeds onto the back straight. Flag station at the end. I already mentioned the crown and the back straight. The bus stop, everybody knows what that looks like, I hope. Here's another view of it. A couple of views of it. In the video, well, again, you pick a breaking point that works for you here. It is entirely not only possible, but advisable to trail brake into the bus stop. You can trail in basically as far as you're able to do. I trailed to basically the first curb on the right. David Murray can trail brake all the way to this second, almost to the second curb. I haven't been able to figure out how to do that, but my point is, you know, we can carry a lot of speed in here, and at the same time, we have to be aware that it's a very busy section of the track. So something to work up to in small bites, small increments. As per the video, I turn in at the beginning of the fat white line on the left here. I tend not to use much of the curb on the right here. Lots of people do. It's faster to use the curb. It's also harder on the car. So, you know, pick your choice. You can see from the black marks how many people use the first curb here. And if you are trail braking in, then obviously you've got to, and you're going to try to trail brake past this curb, then you have to obviously, you know, relax the brake pressure a little bit to go over the curb and then back on. And yes, it's the unloaded side of the car, but it's still a pretty good whack to the car. At this point, we should be getting back on the gas, and we can accelerate pretty hard all the way, you know, through the rest of the bus stop at this point, assuming we've lined it up and got it, and we're on the correct line. Again, some people run over the curbs. I don't, but your choice. But if you do choose to run over the curbs, just realize you're subtracting margin. I use the curbs as margin. If I don't execute perfectly and I end up using a foot of curb, you know, no big deal. If you're routinely using 2 or 3 feet of curb, and now you screw up by 6 inches or a foot, guess what? It may not be so so attractive. Carousel, turn 5. Obviously, big sweeping turn. I do want to point out that this is a passing zone right here on the right, and one that everybody should be using. If there's a car right behind you in the bus stop, send them around here. It's the easiest pass on the track, and not enough people use it. Neither car has to hardly make an adjustment. The passing car ducks under, off. It's offline a touch, but not enough to really affect things very much. And the car giving the pass is barely affected as well. But we're looking for the flag station on the right because we can't see it yet from here, or even we can almost begin to see it from here, not quite. But we're looking for that to wind our way down. Everybody knows the banking is the reason that we only use the inside third or so of the track here. Now we can see the flag station. That's where the apex is. The apex is a long apex, 20, 30, 40 feet along the curb. And this is one of those places where you should routinely, every 2 or 3 laps, brush this curbing. It's not curbing that we want to run up on because the gators here are quite rough, but we want to brush the curbing to know that we're using every inch of the track. Most drivers are at least 2 feet off of the curb on this section. I'm always surprised at how far people are missing the apex here. Here you can see the apex. The laces, obviously long corner, lots of ways to approach it here. But there are several references that I mentioned in the video that you can use to help set yourself up. First one is the billboard on the right. There's a grate on the right, and then the first flag station. So here, as we come down the hill, is the grate on the right. That's David Murray's turn in for this corner, same apex. So early turn in, very gradual while he was braking down into the corner. I have a hard time executing that, but if you want to know an optimum line, that would be David Murray's suggestion. In any case, what we don't want to do is just go straight down the right side of the track here, brake, and then wait to turn in because we have no margin left. If we do that, all we have in front of us is a tire wall. Instead, what we want to do is we want to bend the car in as we're braking, or even before we brake, depending on how you want to do it. But we want to brake so that we have lots of asphalt in front of us here. And if we do that, then as we can use as a reference point, because the challenge here is not enough reference points, right? Well, the first flag station is a good reference point. Let's see if I don't, but we can see it on the right here. In my experience, we want to be about a car width off the inside when we're abreast of that first flag station. It's also a good place to make any steering adjustment that needs to be made to make sure that we're going to get down tight on the apex. Again, this is another corner where too many drivers are too far off the apex. And in this corner, not only do we want to use the apex to get every inch, there is very favorable camber for a relatively short distance. It's all down by the apex, and we want to use every bit of that favorable camber at the apex. It's a little hard to see in the photos here, but if you've walked the track, you know how much really helpful camber there is right here at the apex. Here's the toe. I already mentioned to look for the sealer patches to give yourself good references for the turn in. We can trail brake into this corner some, but we don't have to trail brake a lot, because as soon as we can get the car to start to turn, guess what? The hill slows the car, helps the car turn. And at that point, when we want to be coming off the brakes and be getting ready as soon as the car turns to commit to the gas. Again, we want to use the whole track here at the apex, run along the apex for at least a few feet, if not 10 or 15, and use the whole track at track out. again, many drivers never get anywhere near the white line here. Never mind, there's 2 feet of track beyond the white line. It's there, we paid for it, use it. The heel requires patience, as I've already said. You can see in the overhead, 110, 120 degrees, sharp corner. The apex is way around. And so we can, this is a trail brake corner, we can trail in. If it's a mid-engine car, not as much, but you can still do some trail brake. In either case, we have to be patient before we can get on the gas, because the apex is a long ways around. At this point, now we can begin, we should, I don't care what the car is at this point at the apex, we should be on the gas. How hard we're on the gas is a function of how much power you have. A low-powered car can be on quite a bit of gas. A high-powered car, we can be squeezing the gas pedal. But regardless, by the time we're abreast the apex here, we can begin to start to accelerate. It's kind of the same story at the off camber, although in this case we have the hill that helps us brake as we come in. And again, it requires a lot of patience because this is a long corner, and unlike the heel where we have camber to help us here, we have a flat corner and no help from the from the banking. Here's the hill that we can brake into that helps us slow the car. If we are on the brakes coming and we want to carry some brake over the hill, which I recommend, we have to relax the brakes as we come over the hill as the car gets a bit light. Long apex, patience. Again, we want to be getting, we want to be on some gas by the time we're at the apex. How much, again, is going to vary. Track out, now that we can, now that we can see where we're going, we can be committing to the gas and accelerating hard. Turn 10, not a trail brake corner because turns 10 and 11 are fast. So just a tiny bit of trail brake to help the car turn so that we can get back to some gas and be able to commit to the gas once the car is set into the corner and pointed in the right direction. Remember that go, no go. These are great examples of we can get on the gas relatively early and squeeze the gas pedal and commit to even full gas sooner than you may think if we do it all correctly. And again, back to go, no go in these corners. Because a mistake in these corners, a big mistake in these corners is going to be a big hit, unfortunately. But they're great corners if we execute them correctly. Braking is at the 150 mark, and for most people, turn-in is at the 100 mark here. And again, we should be brushing the brakes at 150 or a little more, depending on how much power you have. Coming off as we turn in. And this is a corner where some people feel it helps about halfway between turn in and apex to turn the wheel just a touch more in to make sure we get tight on the apex curbing here. So at about this point, you can actually, give the wheel a little, extra tug to the left, make sure we're on the curbing, but we can also be, beginning to pick up the gas at this point. The approach to 11, we want to brake a lot earlier than seems natural. Common mistake here is to carry way too much brake and trail brake into the corner. Because this is a fast corner and it leads onto the front straight. So we want to maximize exit speed here. Braking zone is earlier, turn-in zone is earlier than they think. It's roughly where the track starts to get wider, which is pretty much where the cone is in this picture. But forgetting the cone, if you notice where the track widens out here, that can give you a good reference for turn-in, on this corner. Apex isn't visible as we turn in. But as I said, it's early, or a little earlier than may seem reasonable at first, but it actually works. We do want to run along it for 10 feet or more. And there is enough camber here to help us as we get to track out. And that does kind of show up in this photo a little bit, as does obviously the blend line, which we have to respect if a car is anywhere in it going into the pits. And I didn't mention the blend line entering the track between turns 1 and 2, but everyone should know that's there, and to stay all the way track right, all the way to the apex of turn 2 when entering the track, whether the track's hot or not. So with that, let me just mention that I'm hoping to get scheduled a Zoom session for Q&A discussion on this material on Thursday, which would be the 16th at either 7:30 or 8 o'clock. So watch the track pack and the Facebook group for final details on that. But in the meantime, if you have questions on any of the material here, feel free to send me an email, gilbert4@rcn.com. Thanks, and I will see you at Watkins Glen.